So we're going to ask Shawn Evans to join us on stage. Shawn is the Principal and Director of Preservation of Cultural Projects at AOS Architects and is working on the plans to renovate the Peterson Student Center at St. John's College, whose interior, of course, was designed by Girard's. So their final talk together will be planning the future of an unfinished masterpiece. And please welcome.
Thank you. I have to beg for your indulgence here. I'm not talking about the past. I'm not talking about history. I'm talking about what happens now. And this is a project that's still in gestation. It's still in my belly, if you will. This is actually my son. So I'm kind of talking about ideas. These are not plans that have been vetted or approved, and this is not certainly going to happen. But I did want to. I was thrilled that Todd talked so eloquently earlier about love, and one of my mentors, the great architectural Italian thinker Marco Frescari, and there's a couple more Frescarians who've been in the room in the last couple of days. He talked about the relationship between the architect and the client as a great love affair, and that the architect is the mother, and the client is the father, and the client impregnates the architect with the program. And I've always thought that was really beautiful. And so I've turned out to be much more of an architect who works on older buildings, and so I often have a relationship as well with a prior architect or designer. So I guess it's kind of like a ménage à trois. So we're talking about something that's unfinished, and so much like this old picture of my son who's not yet there, not yet realized, we're talking about something of Girard's that was, we question whether it was ever really finished. It's always talked about as unfinished. I wonder about that, I'm not so certain. So we are talking about planning the future of an unfinished masterpiece. So my firm was hired to plan renovations of the entire student center. I'm only going to be talking about the mural today. And when we got the project, when we interviewed for it, the college asked, should we finish the mural? And it turns out they've actually hired people in the past to finish the mural and then change their mind each time. And when I was asked this point blank in the interview, and I said, absolutely not, because I think it's an extraordinary work, even in its current state, even though we know much about what might have been. And we don't know what Girard would have done because the baby, when it was in his belly, was never born fully. So should we try to finish? What do we do? What do we know about the history? I think Rachel did a great job kind of talking about some of our archival explorations. Lastly, where is the hand of the master? What did Girard do? So, well, there's his left hand, and there's his right hand. But when we look in the archives, it's actually these two guys' hands painting the actual mural. Now, neither one of those men are Girard. We're not sure if one of them might be John Newhart, which we understand through conversation was very involved in this project. But this is an important thing, and when you start thinking about conservation, we have the work of a master here, Alexander Girard. Did he actually paint it? Did he conceive it? Does that change how we think about it from a conservation perspective? We know quite a bit about this. We've talked about lists a lot during the last couple of days. We have a list of the 240 cells of the mural. Here I'm only showing you the top 9. And you'll notice that number 4 and number 9 are blank. So we'll remember that. And as Rachel said, we have many of these cartoons, if you will. Here's one of a protractor. It's rather dim. But when you look at the mural as realized, at least in the first 20 feet, of course, very few of these are drawn as pencil drawings. So we don't know how any of these symbols might have been fully realized in a quote-unquote completed mural. We also have an incredible clippings file that he maintained and collected images of things that he was going to use in the mural. And then lastly, there's a list of priorities where he actually says the first priority is cells 204 through 240 or whatever, and the second priority is this. And I think they got into a dispute over how much money it was going to cost to finish the mural, and so they ended up not doing the whole thing. So what we have is really it's a question. Is it an unfinished painting? And we think a lot, in my role as an architectural preservationist conservator, about the degree to which an architect's or an artist's vision is completed. This is, of course, a magnificent painting by Alice Neal of James Hunter. Is it finished? Cézanne was very well known for leaving parts of the canvas blank, which initially was quite shocking when these paintings were displayed in Paris. Should we finish that Cézanne? Of course not. We have some remarkable paintings from history. Here's the Treaty of Paris by Benjamin West. This was painted immediately after the Treaty of Paris, and he has painted the American signers of the treaty and left blank on the right. This is where the Brits were going to be, and they never agreed to the signing, so the painting was never finished. Should we finish it? And then, of course, we have the amazing, sad, and kind of hilarious botched restoration from Spain. And this is the kind of thing that happens when people decide that they're going to finish something that was left unfinished or was damaged. We also think about the lessons from unfinished buildings. There's been some mention of Corbusier. Corbusier designed an incredible set of buildings in Firminy, which is not a well-known town in France, but an industrial town, and a remarkable church. And it's hard to see in this photograph, but this was as far as they got in 1975. It was finished just in 2006 by José Ubery, who was a remarkable architect who worked in Corbusier's office, worked on these drawings, and they had the complete set of construction drawings. They knew exactly how that building was going to be built. So in that case, I would say it certainly was appropriate to finish. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the Noise Museum in Berlin, which was the last major structure in Berlin that was left in a semi-ruined condition, was magnificently completed, restored, preserved, none of these words quite work, by David Chipperfield and Julian Harrop in 2009. And they, working together, developed an incredible restoration, preservation, revitalization approach that looked at the decorative schemes of the interior as well as the exterior of the building, thinking about it much like a Greek vase that we've all seen, restored Greek vases at the Met and many other museums, where the form is recreated, but you wouldn't dare in-paint the rest of the Discobolus or whoever else might be on the vase. And so both from the interior that you see in the center and the exterior, they're kind of returning the form, but acknowledging the act of the ruin and the pain of war. Of course, there are many, many cases from the Renaissance. Here we have Michelangelo's San Lorenzo Basilica, famously unfinished on the front, wonderfully finished on the back by a series of architects. We have his drawings. Should we finish it? Somebody thought so. And what we see in these cases is that an architect, an artist, when something is left unfinished, Michelangelo did not work everything out in that Conte crayon drawing. We don't know what he would have done in finishing that building. So how do we think about the mural at Girard? At St. John's. I've been thinking a lot about this remarkable discovery in Dresden on this Vermeer painting, Girl Reading a Letter by the Open Window. And for long, the conservators have known that there was a painting of a Cupid that was on the wall. And through advances in scientific technology, they've realized that, in fact, Vermeer did finish that painting with the Cupid exposed, and someone 30, 40 years after the painting was completed painted over it to change the narrative content of the work. So we think that these are the issues that we're contemplating as we think about this mural at St. John's. So here's Girard. Of course, what would he do in this situation? I think he would think that all this theorizing was a bit silly, And he would tell us to find joy, right? We've heard a lot about joy in the last few days. We also are looking at the type of program that is offered at St. John's. It's a place very unlike contemporary educational environments that are riddled with technology and projectors and gizmos and computers. At St. John's, everywhere you go, there are chalkboards. And the evidence of a mathematical problem that's been worked out, or a logical, a work of logic or literature analysis, these are left behind. And so we're curious about this kind of fear of technology and wondering if there's some way that we can exploit it. So here's the mural. And as Rachel showed us much better pictures, this area on below is the 20 feet that was finished. And then we have the 110 feet of mural that is always described as unfinished. And I wonder about that, and if you join us on the tour, we can have an interesting debate about that, because the color scheme is actually quite different than the portion of the mural that is quote-unquote finished. So this is the wall and its complications. It's riddled with doors and elevators and buttons and exit signs and vents. Most famously, the fire hose cabinet, which since fire hoses are now illegal in buildings, it just has a fire extinguisher. So these are the things that he had to deal with in setting out the grid. Here's the grid of the structure for the 240 cells of the mural. And we talked that we know a lot about what Girard might have intended in some of those cells. So now everything that's colored purple is where in that list we know what Girard was intending to put there. The white spaces are those blanks from the inventory. So, but when they decided to paint only the first 20 feet, he juggled some things around. So some of this narrative content, some of these symbols moved from his overall vision into the prioritized phase 1. So if we were to finish the mural, because we know what he would have done, how would we have filled in those blanks? And then here we have the mural again as it exists. So here, our idea is to both restore it, to complete it, and then to unrestore it and uncomplete it all at the same time through the use of light and technology. So through the use of projection mapping, we can project onto the walls the cartoons that Girard has left us, completely uninterpreted. This is what we know. This is what he put in those cells. So you see the dice, the scales. We can also project the clippings files that he collected for certain cells, so that we can kind of start to tell the story. And we can invite other artists or students of the college to fill in the missing blanks. And it becomes interactive. We think about all of Girard's amazing writings about decorating one's home and how he envisioned these as storage displays that were ever changing and moving around. And so this might be changing all the time. Lastly, it's because it's a student center, there are bulletin boards everywhere, and there's notices of all kinds of things going on. So why can't we really enliven this wall and project when the karate class is happening or a math tournament, and really make this a vivid display that is interactive, that students can post things to, that faculty can, the tutors, can post things to. We think this is pretty wonderful. One of the things about changing buildings is that programs change. And these two double doors used to be the place where students and tutors and staff would enter the dining hall. The way that they serve food has changed, and so these doors are now permanently locked, and nothing happens there. What if we turn that into a place where you could sit down and have a conversation, and there's instructions for how to upload your material to the wall, so that it becomes a place of conversation and interaction. And of course, we have this remarkable telephone anachronism, and that actually does say telephone in Greek above, and we have the resistors and the raven on there. And if you weren't comfortable sitting at the former dining hall doors to post your material, you might sit in there and interact with the mural on yourself. He's a good-looking guy. So here's the current condition looking east, and what this might be. Now, of course, this is, as I said, this is an idea that's in our bellies, it's gestating. I don't understand the technology of how one might do this. Now that we have this idea, we're going to start really exploring how we actually do this. It might only work at night, but we still think that would be pretty remarkable because it is a 24-hour building. And lastly, here's looking straight on to the wall and what that might look like. So we see this as an act of speculative restoration of what might have been. And in fact, at the same time, through shadow, as people walk past and examine the wall, we can restore it as well to the condition that it exists in now by blocking the projection so that one can see the current colors. And so it is a case where we think we can have our cake and eat it too. Thank you.